Okay, so in this part, we're going to consider the story of David and his betrayal by his son Absalom, or Avshalom in Hebrew. This story's going to serve a couple of purposes. It's going to let us see how different people dealt with King David when he made correct decisions, when he made incorrect decisions, when he made decisions that they disagreed with. Also, King David is a picture of Mashiach. In fact, Mashiach is referred to as King David, that King David will rule. Speaking of Yeshua, he's of the lineage of King David, or King David in Hebrew. So we can see a couple of different things from this. We're going to consider all of this in terms of what's actually happening in King David's life. David was the Mashiach of Yehovah. All that means is that he is the anointed one of Yehovah. King Saul, or Shaul, was the anointed one before David, and Yeshua, the Christ, or the Mashiach, Yeshua HaMashiach, that just means Yeshua, the anointed. That's all that Christ means. Obviously, it's not his second name. That's all that Mashiach means as well. It's also used as a reference to the Messiah, but Mashiach generally means anointed one, and David certainly was a Mashiach. Avshalom was his son. So we can see parallels there between Yeshua and the children of Elohim. In 2 Samuel 12:11-12, we see the prophet Nathan, or Nathan, in 2 Samuel 12, and he comes to David and he tells him a parable relating to his treatment of a man named Uriah the Hittite, the fact that he had killed him. As punishment for what David had done, thus said Yehovah, see, I am raising up evil against you from your own house. This is going to be Avshalom. And shall take your wives before your eyes, give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this son. For you did it in secret, but I shall do this deed before all Israel and before the sun. So we're going to see many events come upon King David, and it's as a result of what David did. Now, when we're looking for parallels with Yeshua, obviously there's no parallel with Yeshua having done something wrong, and his sons acting, or the sons of Elohim acting in a certain way towards him. When we have these narratives which are a picture of something else, or they are events which will repeat in a cycle, it's not always that you're going to get the exact same event, just with different people in the event. So we shouldn't look too closely at these things to try to understand, well, if this happened to David, then what is the equivalent of it, in whatever situation? We're going to see Avshalom rise against David, that we're also going to see someone else rise against David, and they're going to have similar characteristics. They're going to be cast in the same mold, if you like, and we will have people all throughout history who are cast in the same mold. Both of these were both in the lifetime of King David. So throughout history, we should expect to see men like Absalom, and we should expect to see men like Joab, for example, the commander of David's army, who will treat leadership in the same way as these men treated King David. Also, that will treat Yeshua in the same way they treated David. So from the human perspective, we've got David's enemies. Avshalom, he was David's son, and he tried to take control of Israel. We will have those who are sons of Elohim who try to take control of Israel from the hands of those whom Yehovah has appointed or anointed in the case of David. We've got Ahithophel. He was David's friend and his counselor, and he actually defects to Absalom's rebellion. So after Absalom's rebelled, Ahithophel, who was David's close friend, who he writes of in the Psalms, who betrayed him, he defects over to Absalom's side. So we should expect to see people like that when there is rebellion against leadership or rebellion against Yeshua. We should expect to see the same sort of people. We've got Shimei. He was a Benjamite man who curses King David, and we'll see about him. We'll see how David treats him, and then we'll see what his ultimate end is, which would tell us something about how Yeshua will deal with such a person. And then we've got Adoniah. He was a man who wishes to seize the kingdom as David's death drew near. So Adoniah actually has many characteristics that are the same as Absalom. So Absalom is that sort of person, and Adoniah is the same sort of person as Absalom, the same sort of person that we will see in the future. He tries to seize control of the kingdom as David grew weak. He tried to make himself the king instead of Solomon. We've got David's friends, Mephibosheth. He was of the house of Shaul, King Saul. They were David's enemies. But David, when Saul was king, David was of the type of person that he would not lay hand on King Saul, even when King Saul was trying to kill him. And the reason is because King Saul is Yehovah's anointed. Obviously, he disagreed with him. He was actually being pursued by him to be killed, but he would not take matters into his own hands. He would not lay hand on Yehovah's anointed. So Mephibosheth was of the house of Shaul, whom David wished to show Yehovah's kindness to. He ate at the king's table with David's sons. So this man was lame, he was crippled, and David wanted to show kindness to him, so he allowed him to eat at the table with his sons. Then we have Hushai. He remained loyal to David by infiltrating Jerusalem. When Absalom comes to Jerusalem and David leaves, Hushai infiltrates Jerusalem, and he gives advice which is contrary to Ahithophel's. Okay, Ahithophel, who is David's friend, the one whom he writes of in the Psalms, his advice was kind of revered by people. But Hushai, because he's loyal to David, he goes to Jerusalem when David leaves. He speaks to David about it. He goes to Jerusalem, and he actually gives advice contrary to Ahithophel's. Ahithophel is actually a picture of Judas. In this whole narrative of what happens to David when he goes out into the wilderness, and he's at Machanaim, all sorts of things are paralleled with the gospel accounts. There's a very good book called the Scroll of the Gospel of David. It's among very few things that I would ever recommend to people as something to consider. And you'll see how David's life during this period is actually a mirror of what we see in Yeshua's life. So when I say David is a picture of Messiah, that is a lot more definite than it may first appear. Barzillai provided David with what he needed whilst he was in the wilderness. And this man was a foreigner, and yet he followed after David with all of his heart, which should give us a good picture of the Gentiles coming to Yeshua. Those of the foreigners who come to Yeshua with all their heart will receive a position in Yeshua's kingdom. Barzillai actually ends up being one of David's commanders. So David's commanders, we've got Yoav, Ittai, and Avishai. Okay, I want to put these names in front of you because a lot of the time when you're reading through these narratives, when the names are in Hebrew, even when they're not, even when they've been transliterated into English, it can all get a bit much and it can bog you down a little bit. And you're thinking, who is that guy again? It says Joab does this, or whatever. It can be very difficult to follow. So I just want you to be familiar with these names. Try to hold on to who they are as we see them in the narrative. So in 2 Samuel 13, 20 to 21, we see the beginning of unrest in David's kingdom. It was 2 Samuel 12, where David is told by Yehovah through Nathan the prophet, I'm going to do this to you. You've done this in secret, but I'm going to do it openly before all of Israel. And we see the beginning of these events in 2 Samuel 13. Avshalom, her brother, said to her, has Amnon, your brother, been with you? Okay, what's being dealt with here is there was a young girl called Tamar, and Amnon, her brother, was in love with her. So he had her come to him when he was sick to tend to her, and then he lies with her. And then it says that she was more hated in his eyes than she had been loved in his eyes previously. But Avshalom, her brother, Tamar's brother, said to her, has Amnon, your brother, been with you? But now keep silent, my sister. Here's your brother. Don't take this matter to heart. So Tamar remained in the house of her brother Avshalom, but was ruined. And King David heard all these reports, and he was very wroth. And Avshalom spoke to his brother Amnon neither good nor evil, for Avshalom hated Amnon because he had humbled his sister Tamar. As we saw in the first part, you're not supposed to hold hatred towards somebody in your heart. You're supposed to reprove them openly. But he tells Tamar, don't say anything, keep silent. She lives in Avshalom's house, and he hates Amnon in his heart, and he's actually plotting to kill him. King David is the one who is responsible for justice in the realm. He knows about it. He is very angry about it. No one knows what King David would have done. But Avshalom decided, this isn't right. I'm going to take this into my own hands. And the same could be seen today with people who have people in positions of leadership who know about situations. They're judging them justly, or according to what they see as being right. And other people kind of get an idea about what's going on, and they kind of get an idea in their head what is the right way to do it, and that the leadership is actually doing it wrong, when actually that's not what we're to do. And if we think the leadership are wrong, we're to go and reprove the leadership. But that's not how Avshalom is. He tells Tamar to keep quiet. He knows, or presumably he knows, that King David knows about these reports, but he decides to do something on his own. And actually what happens is all of King David's sons are sat down at dinner, and Absalom has them to kill Amnon. He does justice as he sees in his eyes. We can also see a parallel with Yeshua and his people, how they will decide what is right in their own eyes and not go by what the word says. 2 Samuel 13:29-39 says, Then the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded, and all the sons of the king rose up, and each one mounted his mule and fled. So it's Absalom's servants. All of the king's sons are there at dinner. They go in, they kill Amnon, and all the rest of his sons fled. And it came to be, while they were on the way, that news came to David, saying, Absalom had smitten all the sons of the king, and not one of them is left. So we get an idea here of what rumor is, and how people can come to an idea and therefore subsequent conclusions about what's going on by hearing a rumor about the situation. Turns out in this case to be false. All the sons of the king had risen up and fled. But while they were on the way, news came to King David that Absalom had killed all of his sons. Not the case. And the king rose up and tore his garments and lay on the ground, and all his servants stood by with garments torn. And Jonadab, son of Shema, David's brother, answered and said, Do not let my master say they have killed all the young men, the sons of the king, for only Amnon is dead. For by the command of Absalom, this has been appointed from the day that he humbled his sister Tamar. Okay, so his brother tells him, look, Absalom had this appointed for him from after he lay with his sister. Now let not my master the king take this matter to heart, to think that all the sons of the king are dead, for only Amnon is dead. And sometimes these things happen where false information is spread. Now, King David got the correct information, but somebody else who'd heard the rumor, they might never know that David has got the correct information, and they might act on that idea that David doesn't know the correct information. Yehovah can bring it about for King David to know whatever he wants him to know. We don't take matters into our own hands. We don't go off rumor. We don't go off gossip. We recognize that we don't have the full picture in these situations, and we leave decisions in the hand of those whom Yehovah has appointed, and trust Yehovah to be involved in the situation. Pray to him about the situation. Cry out for what you see as injustice, but don't take matters into your own hands, because maybe there's something you don't know. And Absalom fled, and the young man who was with him lifted up his eyes and looked and saw many people were coming from the way behind him on the side of the hill. Then Jonadab said to the king, Look, the sons of the king are coming. As your servant said, so it is. And it came to be, as soon as he had finished speaking, that, look, the sons of the king came, and they lifted up their voice and wept, and the king too, and all his servants wept very bitterly. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, son of Ammihud, king of Geshur, and David mourned his son all the days. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 days. Okay, so if somebody has spilt the blood of somebody else, then their blood is required. The revenger of blood can take their blood. King David then longed to go to Absalom, for he had been comforted concerning Amnon, because he was dead. So this is where Absalom is. He's in the land of Geshur, and it should be of note that this is not a part of Israel where the revenger of blood would be able to take his life. So he doesn't flee to a city of refuge because it wasn't an accident, but he does flee to somewhere where the revenger of blood can't touch him. Now we have the story of a woman who comes to King David because she's spoken to one of David's commanders. That's Joab. Joab has seen what's going on with Absalom. He thinks that it's wrong, so he thinks, I'm going to take matters into my own hand. I'm going to manipulate the situation. And Joab, son of Zeruiah, knew that the heart of the king was towards Absalom. And Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman and said to her, please pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments, and do not anoint yourself with oil, but act like a woman who has been mourning for a long time for the dead. Then you shall go to the king and speak to him according to this word. And Joab put the words in her mouth. He tells her what to say to go to the king. When the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and did obeisance and said, save, O king. Now, I have a strong dislike for people who are like this woman is, who approach those in leadership or whatever it is in this kind of over-flattering way. The king said to her, what is your trouble? And she answered, truly I am a widow. My husband is dead, and your female servant had 2 sons. And the 2 fought with each other in the field, and there was no one to part them. But the one smote the other and killed him. So it's a similar situation to Absalom and Amnon. See, the entire clan has risen up against your female servant and said, give him who smote his brother so that we may put him to death. So that we put him to death for the life of his brother, whom he killed and destroyed the heir also. Thus they would extinguish my burning coal that is left, and leave to my husband neither name nor remnant on the earth. Okay, so she's saying, look, somebody wants to put him to death like the revenger of blood would be able to with Absalom. The king said to the woman, go to your house and let me give orders concerning you. The woman of Tekoa said to the king, my master, O king, let the crookedness be on me and on my father's house, and the king and his throne be guiltless. And the king said, whoever speaks to you, bring him to me, and let him no longer touch you. Okay, so what David is actually going to do here is he's going to make a pronouncement which is against Torah. If this had happened and a man had killed another man in Israel, then that man should be put to death according to the Torah. Doesn't matter all of these kind of sentimental considerations that there are. You know, she doesn't want to lose her last son or her husband's last son. But what will be required is for justice to be done. What David actually does here is wrong. But instead of someone saying to him, no, actually, the Torah says something different, which would be sound rebuke, what we have is the people, especially this woman, saying, yes, that's great, you've done well. She said, please let the king remember Yehovah your Elohim and the Redeemer of blood not destroy anymore, lest they destroy my son. And he said, as Yehovah lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. The woman said, please let your female servant speak a word to my master the king. And he said, speak. And the woman said, why have you reasoned like this against the people of Elohim? For in speaking this word, the king is as one who is guilty, in that the king does not bring his outcast one home again. So rather than her saying, you're wrong in this because my son should be put to death, the people who want to put him to death are correct. She actually says, well, why didn't you do the same to Absalom? For we shall certainly die and become like water spilled on the ground, which is not gathered up again. Yet Elohim does not take away a life, but shall devise ways so that his outcast ones are not cast out from him. And this is what people do. They twist the word in line with their own agenda. Yehovah brings back his outcast ones. He doesn't want them to be dead. Well, actually, Yehovah brings back his outcast ones when they have repented and they're not the same people who committed the sin in the first place. But you can twist this word to kind of look like, oh, Elohim is love. Elohim doesn't cast anyone out, whatever else you want to say. Elohim does not take away a life. I'm pretty sure he does. I'm pretty sure that Elohim is just, and that if David had been acting correctly according to the Torah here, he would have had the man put to death. Or he would have said, no, these people are right in wanting to put him to death. And now I've come to speak this word to my master the king, because the people have made me afraid. And your female servant said, please let me speak to the king. It could be that the king does what his female servant asks. For the king has listened to deliver his female servant from the hand of the man seeking to destroy me and my son together from the inheritance of Elohim. Well, she wouldn't be able to be killed. She certainly wouldn't be one whom the Redeemer of blood would kill. Her son would be, and rightly so. Then your female servant said, please let the word of my master the king be comforting. For my master the king is as the angel of Elohim in discerning the good and the evil, and Yehovah your Elohim is with me. Please let your word be comforting. Sometimes the decisions that people in leadership have to make aren't comforting. We'll get onto a little bit more depth about that in part 3. The king answered and said to the woman, please do not hide from me the matter that I am asking you. And the woman said, please let my master the king speak. And the king said, is the hand of Yoav with you in all this? Which of course it was. David is discerning in this. He thinks, there's something a bit Yoav-y about this. Is the hand of Yoav with you in all this? And the woman answered and said, as your soul lives, my master the king, no one turns to the right or to the left from all that my master the king has spoken. Apart from, Avshalom and Yoav when he fancies it, and this person and that person. The people who are faithful to the king don't, no matter what, no matter whether they agree or disagree. We'll see the correct way to deal with somebody with whom you think there is a problem in how they are leading. We saw that you are to rebuke them. And we see one of David's men actually do that to him every time he thinks that there's a problem in something David has said. He doesn't hold it in his heart. What he does is he immediately says what he thinks about the situation. But when David makes the final pronouncement on it, even though it's still in disagreement with this man, whom we'll see, this man still goes with what David has said, because he is Yehovah's anointed. At the end of the day, if Yehovah's anointed make decisions that are wrong, Yehovah can deal with them. Just like we see Yehovah dealing with David when he had Uriah the Hittite murdered. It's not for us to take those matters into our own hand. For your servant Yoav commanded me and put all these words in the mouth of your female servant. Your servant Yoav has done this to change the appearance of the matter. But my master is wise according to the wisdom of an angel of Elohim to know all that is in the earth. And the king said to Yoav, see now, you shall do this matter, and go bring back the young man Avshalom. And Yoav fell to the ground on his face and did obeisance and blessed the king. And Yoav said, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your eyes, my master, O king, in that the king has done the word of his servant. Actually, what's happened here is he fomented rebellion in his heart. He tried to manipulate the king. And as it turns out, that's what the king would have agreed with if he had just come to him and suggested something different. And Joab rose up and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, "Let him return to his own house, but do not let him see my face." And Absalom went to his own house and did not see the king's face. And in all Israel there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his good looks. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head there was no blemish in him. And when he cut the hair of his head, for it was every year's end that he cut it because it was heavy on him when he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels by the king's weight. So Absalom is a man who has very long hair, such as it grows at such a rate that he must cut it at the end of every year because it is heavy upon him. And to Absalom were born 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar, I imagine after his sister. She was a woman of fair appearance. So what Absalom wants now is to see the king's face, and David has actually acted against the Torah in bringing Absalom back and not requiring his life. He should have the death penalty. But David brings him back into the camp, and it ends up causing problems for David. And Absalom dwelt in Jerusalem 2 years, and he had not seen the king's face. And Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but he would not come to him, because David had said to him, "He shall not see my face." So when Absalom is asking for Joab so he can see the king, he doesn't know what's going on with Joab. He doesn't know what the king has commanded. He doesn't have any idea. So again, what does he do? Does he obey? Does he just allow things to transpire? No. What he does is he takes things into his own hand. He sent again the second time, but he would not come. He said to his servants, "See, Joab's field is near mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire." And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab rose and came to the house of Absalom and said to him, "Why have your servants set my field on fire?" And Absalom said to Joab, "Look, I sent to you, saying, 'Come here,' so that I send you to the king and say, 'Why have I come from Geshur?'" So he doesn't say, "What have I done? I set your field on fire." He says, "I did it because you didn't do what I told you to." It should show us about his attitude. It says, "It was good for me while I was there, and now let me see the king's face. And if there is any crookedness in me, then you shall put me to death." I actually imagine that Absalom at this point is fearful that he is going to have what the Torah would have happened to him happen. But he says here, "Let me see the king, and if I've done anything wrong, then you can put me to death." Joab then went to the king and informed him, and he called for Absalom, and he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. Then the king kissed Absalom. And you would think, well, Absalom's got what he wants now. Maybe things are going to go better. No, what does Absalom do? He goes and he raises an army and horses and chariots so that he can further rebel against the king. It came to be after this that Absalom prepared a chariot and horses for himself and 50 men to run before him. Remember that, chariot, horses, 50 men, because that's what we're going to see later when we have rebellion against the kingdom. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. And it came to be whenever anyone who had a complaint came to the king for Mishpat, that Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And when he said, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel," Absalom would say to him, "Look, your matters are good and right, but you have nobody from the king to hearken to you." So he lets it be known that he would make other justice or other declarations of justice than the king. And whenever anyone would come to hear from the king, he would say, "Oh, no, it's a shame no one from the king will shema unto you. Your matters are good and right." It seems that all he's heard from him is what tribe he's from. And when they would say this, he would say, "Your matters are good and right." And of course, people do that today. If the leadership has made a decision on something that others are not happy about, then people may well say, "Oh, no, I think that the leadership are wrong here in what they've said." Not going to rebuke the leadership, not going to try and resolve the problem, but trying to take that authority upon themselves and say, "If I was a judge, I would judge things differently. It's a shame that the leadership are not like me." And Avshalom would say, "Oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everybody who has complaint or case will come to me, and I shall let right be done to him. Oh, that I were one of the Shoftim, one of the judges. I would let right be done to everyone, like you. I would declare you to be right." Doesn't matter what the king would declare. Avshalom is subverting the king to try and take power for himself. And it came to be, whenever anyone came near him to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. So he would act like the king. And Avshalom did this to all Israel who came to the king for Mishpat. And Avshalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Very simple technique here to steal their hearts. Just tell them that they're all right, and that if he were in authority, he would treat them correctly. And then when they come to him, he has them treat him like the king. It came to be at the end of 4 years that Avshalom said to the king, "Please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I vowed to Yehovah." Avshalom knows that David is a righteous man. If he tells David, "I need to go to Hebron to pay a vow to Yehovah," he knows that David is going to say, "Of course, yes, go and do this thing that you must do." But of course, that's not what he is going to do. He's going to go to Hebron with his little army, and he's going to declare himself to be king. "For your servant vowed a vow while I dwelt at Geshur in Aram, saying, if Yehovah indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve Yehovah." The king said to him, "Go in peace." And he rose up and went to Hebron. But Avshalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "As soon as you hear the sound of a ram's horn, then you shall say, Avshalom is king in Hebron." So he sends these spies throughout everywhere, telling everyone, when you hear the sound of the ram's horn, Avshalom is in Hebron, then declare, Avshalom is king in Hebron. And with Avshalom went 200 men from Jerusalem who were invited, and they went along unsuspectingly and did not know the matter at all. That may well be the case today when you have somebody like this who's saying, "Oh, I don't think that their leadership is right in this. They've not made the right decision. I would make a better decision if I were in leadership." Then maybe people would follow along unsuspectingly, not knowing the matter, certainly not knowing the greater context of the matter. Avshalom also sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, counselor of David, from his city, from Gilo, when he was bringing offerings. And it came to be that the conspiracy became strong, for the people with Avshalom kept increasing. Then a messenger came to David, saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Avshalom." And David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Rise up and let us flee, for none of us shall escape from Avshalom. Go in haste, lest he overtakes us quickly and brings evil upon us and smites the city with the edge of the sword." So David realizes, well, the people who are with Absalom are much more numerous, and they're going to come to Jerusalem, and they're going to try and kill me and my followers. So he says, we're going to leave Jerusalem. The king's servant said to the king, look, your servant shall do according to all my master the king chooses. So this is what we have. Those who are faithful will do according to what David said. We've seen that David made the wrong choice in inviting Absalom back in the first place, but he wasn't rebuked, and this comes following that. But the ones who are faithful, they say, we will continue to follow my master the king, just as in our little allegory of people today. Those who are faithful will remain with what leadership says. They won't be led astray by gossip or rumors or by someone saying, oh, that's unjust. If I was the leader, I would decide things differently. It gives us a good picture. 2 Samuel 15:19-21, the king said to Ittai the Gittite, why do you go, you also with us? Turn back and remain with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your own place. So he's a foreigner or he's an exile, just as today we have Gentiles, and among them those who are exiled. You came yesterday, and should I today make you wander up and down with us when I'm going wherever I'm going? Return and take your brothers back. Kindness and truth be with you. And Ittai answered the king and said, as Jehovah lives and my master the king lives, in whatever place my master the king is, whether in death or in life, let your servant be there. Okay, and the followers of Yeshua, okay, those from the Gentiles, the exiles among them, who turn back to follow him, do the same. Whether it entails death or it entails life, they will follow after the king. 2 Samuel 15:24-37 says, and see, Zadok also came, and all the Levites with him. The Levites were told that the reason that the sons of Zadok will be the priests is because they remained faithful to David during this time. We see that here. Bearing the ark of the covenant of Elohim, and they set down the ark of Elohim, and Abiathar went up until all the people completed passing over from the city. And the king said to Zadok, if you wonder why they're carrying the ark, they are Kohathites. The king said to Zadok, take the ark of Elohim back to the city. If I find favor in the eyes of Yehovah, then he shall bring me back and show me both it and his dwelling. And those who are faithful to Yehovah have this outlook. If I find favor in the eyes of Yehovah, then it will go well. If I don't, then it will go badly. But if he says, I have not delighted in you, here I am. Let him do to me as seems good in his eyes. Whereas those with the rebellious streak within them, those who don't want to follow after the decisions of leadership, don't have this sort of opinion. They want to do what seems good in their own eyes. The king said to Zadok the priest, are you not a seer? Return to the city in peace, and your two sons with you, Ahimaaz, your son, and Jehonathan, son of Abiathar. Okay, so these are priests. They're his sons. These are of the line of Aaron, who is a Kohathite. Aaron was a Kohathite. Zadok and his lineage came from Aaron, which is why they are able to be the priests in the future. See, I am waiting in the desert plains of the wilderness until the word comes from you to inform me. And David went up by ascent to the Mount of Olives. So he sends the priests who are faithful to him also to Jerusalem to let him know what's going on. David went up by ascent of the Mount of Olives. And as I mentioned before, the scroll of the Gospel of David has all of these parallels in. It's absolutely remarkable, the amount of parallels. And wept as he went up, and he had his head covered and went barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up, weeping as they went up. And David was informed, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. This person who was so close to him was King David's counselor. Again, that's the guy that's mentioned in the Psalms. This would have been crushing for David to realize. David said, O Yehovah, I pray you, make the counsel of Ahithophel foolish. And that's what Hushai ends up doing. But he prays to Yehovah that he would do that. In all of this, we see Yehovah's hand doing his purposes. David is being punished. This punishment has come upon him because Yehovah decreed it. The punishment is being brought by Absalom. Doesn't mean that Absalom is good in Yehovah's eyes. Ahithophel, he prays, make his counsel foolish. Now, Yehovah isn't doing it necessarily for the sake of King David, because all of this is coming upon him as a punishment. But he does heed the prayer, which should teach us something about our own prayers and about seeing the fulfillment of our own prayers. All it means is that it is according to Yehovah's name, according to his purpose, that it is happening. It came to be that David came to the summit where he bowed himself before Elohim and saw Hushai the Archite coming to meet him with his robe torn and dust on his head. So immediately after he prays to make the counsel of Ahithophel foolish, Hushai the Archite, who is the one who will make his counsel foolish, immediately comes to meet him. And David said to him, if you pass on with me, then you shall become a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I am your servant, O king, one servant of your father, but now I am your servant, and you shall nullify the counsel of Ahithophel for me. So he says, look, if you come with me, you're just kind of going to get in the way. Go back to Jerusalem and nullify the counsel of Ahithophel, who is now with the conspirators. And are not Zadok and Abiathar the priests with you there? And it shall be that every matter you hear from the king's house, you should report to Zadok and to Abiathar the priests. See, there with them are their two sons, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jehonathan, Abiathar's son. By them you shall send me every matter you hear. So David has people within the conspirators to subvert what is going on, and also to report back to him what is going on. And Hushai, David's friend, went into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. 2 Samuel 16. David had passed on a little from the summit, and he saw Siva, the servant of Mephibosheth. Okay, Mephibosheth was the guy who was lame in his feet, who had been part of the house of Saul, whom David had fed at the table of his sons, the king's sons. So Siva is the servant of this guy Mephibosheth, who met him with a couple of saddled donkeys, and on them 200 loaves, and 100 cakes of raisins, and 100 summer fruit, and a skin of wine. And the king said to Siva, why do you have these? And Siva said, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, and the bread and the summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for the wearied to drink in the wilderness. So it seems like Siva has the king's best interests at heart. It's perhaps true that he misunderstands some information about the situation. So he's trying to do good, but he doesn't have all of the information. The king said, And where is the son of your master? And Siva said to the king, see, he remains in Jerusalem. When he says, where is the son of your master? He's talking about Mephibosheth. His master is him, is King David. And Mephibosheth is eating as his son. And Siva said to the king, see, he remains in Jerusalem. For he said, today the house of Israel is going to return to the kingdom of my father to me. Today, the house of Israel is going to return the kingdom of Saul to me, Mephibosheth, the rightful heir of it. That's what Siva tells David. Okay, it's not clear why he tells him. What is clear is that he is 100% wrong. It could be that he remained in Jerusalem for another reason, and he's just perceived that he's staying there because he thinks he's going to have the kingdom returned to him. We don't actually know why. We just know that he's not right in what he says, which should be instructive for us. Again, we might not have all the details of a situation, and we shouldn't jump to conclusions about that situation. The king said to Siva, see, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours. Okay, so the king, in the picture, the leadership, believes Siva. He believes him and says, okay, then, if that's true, all of Mephibosheth's stuff is yours. And Siva said, I have bowed myself. Let me find favor in your eyes, my master, O king. And when King David came to Bahurim, he saw a man from the clan of the house of Shaul, whose name was Shimei, son of Gera. So another man who is from the house of Shaul, Saul, coming there. He came out cursing as he came. So he sees King David, naturally somebody whom he may regard as his enemy, and he comes out cursing. He casted David with stones, and all the servants of King David, and all the people, and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. And this is what Shimei said as he cursed, get out, O man of blood, and man of Belial. Jehovah has brought upon you all the blood of the house of Shaul, in whose place you have reigned. And Jehovah has given the kingdom into the hand of Absalom your son. And see, you are in your own evil, for you are a man of blood. So this guy's got the wrong end of the stick as well. He sees what's happening to David. He sees him leaving Jerusalem, and he comes out throwing stones at him, and he says, this is because of what you did to King Saul. Okay, not understanding that Jehovah had instructed him in that, not understanding that that's not actually what's happening at all. David is, as it happens, being punished by Jehovah, but not for the reason that Shimei presumes to be the case. And Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my master the king? Please let me pass over and take off his head. Okay, so Abishai sees what's going on with David, and he says, this guy should be dead. That's what he believes. Okay, but he's waiting on the command of the king. So he comes to the king with what he thinks is the right way forward. He tells the king, as it turns out, David disagrees with him. The king said, what have I to do with you, sons of Zeruiah? For let him curse, because Jehovah has said to him, curse David. And who should say, why did you do that? Okay, David knows he's being punished by Jehovah. And beyond that, he's just willing to say, well, these things are in Jehovah's hands. Okay, even when it's to my detriment, even when I'm the king and this guy's coming in throwing stones at me, just let it be. Obviously, Abishai doesn't agree with him. He thinks that he should be dead. But what does he do? Does he go and kill him on his own? Of course not. He is one of the king's servants. David said to Abishai and all his servants, "See how my son, who came from my own body, seeks my life, and how much more now this Benjamite. Leave him alone and let him curse, for Yehovah has spoken to him. If so be Yehovah does look on my affliction, and Yehovah shall return good to me for his cursing today." And as David and his men went in the way, Shimei as it is, walked alongside them on the hillside and cursed as he went and threw stones at him and kicked up dust. I imagine Abishai isn't very happy at this. He thinks he should be dead, but he is following what the king has said to do. Just as us with Yeshua, we might disagree with things that are in the word. Maybe we do. Maybe we think that we know better than what is in the word. But in all circumstances, we obey the king. In the parallel with leadership today, it's the same. The leadership say something that we disagree with. We should tell them what we think about the situation. We should say, is this not a better way to do it? But if the leadership says, no, we're going to do it this way, then we trust in that. We don't have all the details about the situation, just as Shimei didn't. The king and all the people who were with him became weary, and they refreshed themselves there. And Avshalom and all the people, the men of Yisrael, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with them. And it came to be when Hushai the Archite, the friend of David, had come to Avshalom, that Hushai said to Avshalom, "Let the king live, let the king live." And Avshalom said to Hushai, "Is this your kindness to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend?" Okay, David's your friend. Why didn't you go with him? And Hushai said to Avshalom, "No, I am the one whom Yehovah and this people and all the men of Israel have chosen, and with him I remain. Besides, whom should I serve? Should it not be before his son? Before David's son? Shouldn't I serve before David's son? As I have served before your father, so I am before you." Avshalom said to Ahithophel, "Give your advice, what should we do?" Okay, so Ahithophel is David's counselor who's joined the conspiracy against David, and he's now asked, what is it that we should do? And Ahithophel said to Avshalom, "Go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to look after the house, and all Israel shall hear that you have made yourself a stench to your father, and the hands of all who are with you shall be strong." So they pitched a tent for Avshalom on the top of the house, and Avshalom went into his father's concubines before the eyes of all Israel. This is what Yehovah has brought about. Not because Avshalom is doing any good, but because he's going to use Avshalom for his own purposes. In this case, to punish David in the way that he said he would in 2 Samuel 12. Now the advice of Ahithophel gave in those days was as if one had inquired at the word of Elohim. So it was revered. So was all the advice of Ahithophel, both to David and to Avshalom. And Ahithophel said to Avshalom, "Please let me choose 12,000 men, and let me arise and pursue David tonight." So they have arrived in Jerusalem. Avshalom's gone in and slept with all of his concubines, and Ahithophel further advises Avshalom, "Let me take 12,000 men and go after David and kill David." This is not in Yehovah's plan for David, though. So Yehovah listens to David's prayer that Hushai, or that the advice of Ahithophel would be turned aside. As it turns out, it's done by Hushai. "And come upon him while he is weak and weary, and I shall make him afraid, and all the people who are with him shall flee, and I shall smite the king alone." just as we see Yeshua. It said that this was done to Yeshua so that the prophecy that I shall smite the shepherd and the flock shall flee will come true when Yeshua was taken and all of the disciples fled. Bring back all the people to you. When all return except the man whom you seek, all the people should be at peace. So this is Ahithophel's advice. The saying pleased Avshalom and all the elders of Yisrael. So it looks like this is the game plan. Ahithophel takes an army, pursues David, and kills him. And Hushai said to Avshalom, the advice that Ahithophel has given is not good at this time. So he is supposed to subvert Ahithophel's advice. That's what David has prayed would happen to his advice. And Hushai said, you know your father and his men, that they are mighty men, and they are as bitter in soul as a bear robbed of their cubs in the field. Your father is a man of battle, and would not spend the night with the people. See, by now he is hidden in some pit or in some place, and it shall be when some of them fall at the first, whoever hears it say, there has been a slaughter among the people who are not following Avshalom. So he gives different advice. It's interesting, the advice that Avshalom heeds here is a description of the king that is not true. He tells him some things about David that are true, some things about David that are not true. Your father is a man of battle. He wouldn't spend the night with the people. He's probably hidden in some pit. So he tells him lies about the king. And Avshalom, because he doesn't truly know the name, the character of the king, is led astray by these lies. They're mixed in with truth. David was a man of battle, but the rest of it is false. And the same can be true today with leadership. You know, maybe somebody comes to you with something that sounds like it's true. You don't really have all of the information. They tell you something that's false as well, makes you turn against them. Then you end up being led astray, as Avshalom does here. He's led astray by lies about the king. And this is all so that Yehovah's purposes would be fulfilled. Throughout all of this, Yehovah is weaving all of these things. Do good towards Avshalom, do good towards King David, do bad towards King David. It's all part of his purposes. Neither of them should be confused by what's happening about how Yehovah feels towards them. Avshalom can't say, oh, Yehovah must be with me because this thing went right or that thing went right, or look at the people who are with me. Avshalom can't say that at all. If he did, he would be a fool. All that he can do is look and say, well, my actions here are wrong. So even if something good happens, ultimately, it's not going to be for good in my own life. Even he who is brave, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, would utterly melt. For all Yisrael knows that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are brave men. Avshalom and all the men of Yisrael then said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than the advice of Ahithophel. For Yehovah had ordained to nullify the good advice of Ahithophel for the sake of Yehovah bringing evil on Avshalom, not for the sake of David and for the sake of David's prayer. What he prayed was according to the name of Yehovah, and it came about. But he's bringing it about to do evil to Avshalom. David shouldn't look at this and say, Yehovah heeded my prayer. He's no longer mad at me about Uriah the Hittite. You can't do that. We can't discern how Yehovah feels towards us by what happens in our lives. We can only look at whether or not we're in accordance with his word to see how he feels about us. Hushai then said to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, Ahithophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel such and such, but I have advised so and so. So they're the people who will take the message to King David, or have the message sent. And Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed. Remember here, Ahithophel is a picture of Judas. Okay, he is the one who betrayed Yeshua. Judas betrayed King David. So Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed. So he saddled his donkey and rose up and went home to his house, to his city. Then he gave charge to his house and hanged himself and died. Great parallel. And he was buried in his father's tomb. And David came to Mahanaim, and Absalom passed over the Jordan, he and all the men of Israel with him. And Absalom appointed Amasa over the army instead of Joab. So Joab was previously David's commander. Here, Absalom appoints his own man. Now, Amasa was the son of a man whose name was Yithra, a Yisraelite who was gone in to Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. And Yisrael and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. So Amasa was the son of a man who had gone in to Abigail, who was the daughter of Nahash, who was the sister of Joab's mother. So he appoints him as head of the army over Joab, a man who was related to the one who did such a thing. And Yisrael and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. And it came to be when David had come to Mahanaim, the Shovi, son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the children of Ammon, and Machir, son of Amiel, from Lo-Debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite, from Rogelim. So Barzillai is this foreigner exile. They brought beds and basins and earthen vessels and wheat and barley and flour and roasted grain, beans and lentils and parched, I presume, dehydrated vegetables, with honey and curds and sheep and cheese of the herd for David and the people who were with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. And David sent 1/3 of the people under the hand of Joab, 1/3 of the people under the hand of Avishai, who was the guy who wanted Shimei killed, 1/3 under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. The king said to the people, I certainly go out with you too. So we're going to see that there's a vast difference between Joab, who we saw before manipulating the king when he thought that the king was going to do something wrong. Instead, he manipulated him, and then he was delighted when he found out that the king actually did what he said. We can parallel him, or we can compare him, contrast him with Avishai, who, when he offers advice, if it's not followed, he's not manipulating anybody. He's not going against what the king has said. He's following diligently what the king has said. And the king ordered Joab and Avishai and Ittai, saying, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And all the people heard when the king gave all the commanders orders concerning Absalom. So everybody knew that Absalom was to be treated gently. What we're going to see is that Joab has a disagreement with David about this, and he falls back into his old habits. He doesn't say, what do you mean treat him gently? This man should be killed, like Avishai does. What he does instead is he takes matters into his own hands, just like today. The leadership say something you don't agree with. Do you manipulate? Do you try to just do what you think is right instead? Or are you more like Avishai, who comes and approaches the king the leadership may well agree with you, or they may not agree with you. But regardless, you go and you tell them, and whatever their decision is, that is what you go with. Not if they're telling you to disobey the word in some way, but in all of the instances, you follow what the leadership say because they have been appointed by Elohim. What Yoav does instead is he spears Absalom through the heart with 3 spears. When Absalom met the servants of David, Absalom was riding on a mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of the great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth, and he was suspended between the heavens and the earth, while the mule, which was under him, passed on. So he's hanging helpless in the tree. David has said, don't do anything to him, treat him gently. And a certain man saw it and informed Joab and said, look, I saw Absalom hanging in a terebinth tree. Now this man has heard what David said about treat him gently. Joab said to the man who informed him, now look, you saw him. Why did you not smite him to the earth there? Then I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. The man answered Joab, though I were to receive 1,000 pieces of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the son of the king. Because in our hearing the king ordered you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, take heed, you who go against the youth, go against Absalom. You who go against the youth, against Absalom. Okay, so take heed, you who go against him. Treat him gently. This man has heard the king, and he said, it doesn't matter what the reward would be. I would never go against what the king has said. Okay, but you get people who are more rebellious. They think, I disagree with the decisions of leadership. I'm going to take this into my own hand, and I'm going to do what I think is good. People who are lacking all of the information, usually. Otherwise, I would not have been untrue to my own soul, for no matter is hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. And Joab said, let me not waste time here with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand, and he thrust them through Absalom's heart while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. He wants to do things in his own way. 10 young men who bore Joab's armor went around and smote Absalom and put him to death. So those who were following Joab, they follow along with his rebellion against King David. And Joab blew the ram's horn, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab had held the people back. And they took Absalom and threw him into a large pit in the forest, and heaped a very large pile of stones over him. And all Israel fled, each one to his tent. So being thrown in the pit, having a stone over the grave, all these things are pictures of other things, but I won't go into that here. And Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up a monument for himself, which gives us a little bit of an insight into who Absalom is and what is important to him. He set up a monument to himself, which is in the King's Valley. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the monument after his own name. To this day, it is called Absalom's monument. So again, it should give us an idea of what is important to Absalom. Perhaps why the rebellion in the first place. Okay, now we have a man coming, bearing Basar to King David, bearing good news to King David. And we know, blessed are the feet of those who bear the good news. And we see a picture of somebody who bears the good news coming to King David now. Now David was sitting between the 2 gates. The watchman went up to the roof over the gate, so he's reconquered Jerusalem now. He's retaken it. to the wall and lifted his eyes and looked and saw a man running alone. So the watchman called out and told the king, and the king said, "If he is alone, there is news in his mouth." And he came nearer and nearer. And the watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called out to the gatekeeper and said, "See, a man running by himself." And the king said, "This one is also bringing news." The watchman said, I see the running of the first is like the running of Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. And the king said, "This is a good man, and he comes with good news," or basar, glad tidings, or he comes with gospel. Which is interesting, because he says, I see the running of the first is like the running of Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. He knows that he is coming to bring news to him. And Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, "Peace." Then he bowed. So this is in Machanaim rather than Jerusalem. These men are coming from Jerusalem. After Absalom is killed, David will go back and retake Jerusalem. And Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, "Peace." Then he bowed down his face to the earth before the king and said, "Blessed be Yehovah your Elohim, who has surrendered the men who raised their hand against my master, the king." And the king said, "Peace to the young man, to Absalom." Okay, just like when Yaakov inquires, he says, "Shalom," and the men answer, "Shalom." In the Hebrew, it's similar here. Shalom to Absalom. And Ahimaaz answered, "When Joab sent the king's servant and me your servant, I saw a great crowd, but I did not know why." The king said, "Turn aside and stand here." He turned aside and stood still. And see, the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, "Receive news, my master, the king, for Yehovah has avenged you this day of all those who rose against you." The king said to the Cushite, "Peace to the young man, to Absalom." And the Cushite answered, "Let the enemies of my master the king and all who rise against you for evil be as that young man is." So this guy is a great example of somebody who might be led astray by the idea of a Joab who comes with, "Oh no, someone like that has to be put to death. I'm willing to go against the king that commands from heaven. I'm willing to go against the leadership that Yehovah has put in place to do what I think is right." Here, the Cushite is one who agrees with Joab. Okay, so he is a good example of somebody who could be led astray by that idea. When the guy who he said he's bearing basar, gospel, comes, he says to him, "Peace to the young man, to Absalom." And he said, "When Joab sent the king's servant and me your servant, I saw a great crowd, but I did not know why." So he doesn't know. He's not one who would be swayed by this necessarily. And the king was shaken and went up to the room over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said this, "Oh, my son, Absalom, my son, Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Okay, so when David is saying this, it seems to me that he's saying this because he knows that Absalom has come to his end because of his sin with Uriah the Hittite. And he knows that Absalom was used to punish him, and that's what has ultimately led to his death. So he says, "If only I had died instead of you." Joab doesn't have that piece of information. He doesn't know why the king has said that. Instead, he has an assumption about that, which is wrong and leads him into further disobedience and rebellion. It was reported to Joab, "See, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." Seems to me he's weeping and mourning because he's died as a result of his own sin. So the deliverance that day was turned into mourning for all the people, for the people heard on that day, saying, the king has been grieved for his son. And the people stole back into the city that day, as people who are ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. The king covered his face, as they should. They weren't supposed to be involved in the death of Absalom. The king covered his face, and the king cried out with a loud voice, "O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son." And Joab came into the house of the king and said, "Today you've put to shame all your servants who today have saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and the lives of your concubines, by loving those who hate you, by hating those who love you," as Yeshua did, as it turns out. "For you have made it clear today that you have neither commanders nor servants for today. I know that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, then it would be right in your eyes." So he's right in confronting him for what he actually misunderstands to be the situation, so that David can correct him and say, actually, there's more to it. He's not right in coming and making an accusation against David. "I know that it would have been better if we'd all died." That's just completely unfounded. "Now arise, go out and speak to the heart of your servants. For I swear by Yehovah, if you do not go out, not one passes the night with you. And that is worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now." So now Joab's true colors are coming out before David. He's accusing him. He's saying all of this stuff to him, all because of a misunderstanding. He didn't know the entire situation, but he's happy to go forward on the basis that he does. And Shimei, son of Gerah, a Binyamite, who was from Bahurim, the one who was throwing the stones, hastened and came down with the men of Yehudah to meet King David, and said to the king, "Do not let my master reckon crookedness to me, neither remember what wrong your servant did on the day that my master the king left Jerusalem, that the king should take it to heart." So he asks for forgiveness here. We have David picturing Yeshua. "Do not reckon crookedness to me, nor remember what I've done. For I, your servant, know that I have sinned, and see, I have come today, first of all the house of Yosef, to go down to meet my master, the king." So he's shown repentance. In the situation with leadership, okay, if people go astray and they rebel and whatever, then the leadership ought to have the same attitude towards somebody who comes in repentance, recognizes that what they did was wrong, then they should be forgiven. Of course, according to the word, it's also a picture of how Yeshua is when one comes to him in repentance. But Avishai, son of Zeruiah, answered and said, Should Shimei not be put to death for this, because he has cursed the anointed of Yehovah? So Avishai is still at it. He's been told, leave him alone. Here, he still thinks, let's put him to death. So he comes to the king with his suggestion. And David said, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you are to be adversaries to me today? Should any man be put to death in Israel today? For do I not know that I am the king over Israel today? Hey, he's got the kingdom back, and it's his decree, it's his decision that nobody is going to be put to death. So the king said to Shimei, you do not die. And the king swore to him. Now, with leadership, this might take the form of somebody saying, you have not punished this person in the correct way for whatever it is that we see as sin within them. And maybe they should go and tell the leadership, we don't think that that's fair. But the decision of the leadership would stand in that case, because maybe there's more information that people do not know. It's certainly not justification to take things into your own hands. 2 Samuel 19:24-29, and Mephibosheth, son of Shaul, okay, the guy whose servant came out and told David that he's remaining in Jerusalem because he thinks that he's going to have the kingdom returned to him. The guy who David had sing at his table, at his own table, son of the king Shaul, sitting at the table of the king David, came down to meet the king, and he had not attended to his feet. Remember, he had problems with his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his garments from the day the king went away until the day he came back in peace. So the idea that he was waiting for the death of David to get the kingdom given back to him, it wasn't valid. Maybe that's what Siva believed, but it wasn't true. And it came to be when he had come to Jerusalem to meet the king, that the king said to him, "Why did you not go down with me, Mephibosheth?" And he answered, "My master, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I'm saddling a donkey for myself to ride on it and go to the king, because your servant is lame." So Mephibosheth is also somebody who is lacking information. Siva actually did go to the king, but he thinks that he has deceived him. So they're both missing information that King David has. So King David is in the position to rightly rule, to judge correctly the situation. And he spoke slander against your servant to my master the king. But my master the king is as an angel of Elohim. Therefore, do what is good in your eyes. So again, this attitude that we see of, I'm going to leave it in your hands. For all of my father's house were but dead men before my master the king, rather. Yet you set your servant among those who eat at your own table. Therefore, what right have I to still cry out any more to the king? So he says, look, I was as good as a dead man, and you took me into your house. So what right have I to cry out any more to you? The king said to him, why do you speak any more of your matters? Okay, it's done. I have said, you and Siva share the land. So previously, when he heard from Siva, he said, all that is Mephibosheth's is yours. Then, when Siva's gone back, he's taken the land. Mephibosheth has a grievance. He comes to King David, and this is what King David decides is a just outcome. Maybe neither of them liked that outcome, but it's what King David judged and is in the position to judge. Barzillai the Gileadite came down from Rogelim and passed over the Jordan with the king to send him on his way over the Jordan. And Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old, and he had sustained the king while he was dwelling at Machanaim, for he was a very rich man. This is the foreigner and exile. Okay, and we can see what that would picture with Yeshua. It's a good opportunity for us to see here that these situations, when you see kind of the same characters playing out the same situation, you're not going to be able to say, well, that must be characteristic of the situation and we're waiting for this, or this must happen. The situation's not going to be exactly the same. And we see this here because Barzillai is the Gentile and the exile who comes to Yeshua in the picture. Here he's coming to David. But the picture that we see with Yeshua is not going to be exactly the same as what we see happening here with King David. The king said to Barzillai, please pass over with me, and I shall provide for you with me in Jerusalem. Okay, come over and I will look after you in Jerusalem. Just as Yeshua with those who are faithful servants to him, is going to look after them in the promised land and in Jerusalem. Barzillai's reaction here, though, isn't going to be the reaction of those who are pictured. Barzillai said to the king, how many days of my life, how many are the days of my life that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am now 80 years old. Do I discern between the good and evil? Does your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Do I still hear the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be a further burden to my master the king? That's not going to be what happens in what is pictured by this. We will have eternal life at that point, for example. Your servant would only pass over the Jordan with the king for a short distance. And why should the king repay me with such a reward? Please let your servant turn back again to die in my own city. Again, never going to be what we're going to say. Near the burying place of my father and mother. But here is your servant, Kimham. Let him pass over with my master the king, and do for him what is good in your eyes. The king passed over to Gilgal, and Kimham passed over with him. All the people of Yehudah brought the king over, and also half the people of Israel. And see, the men of Israel were coming to the king. They said to the king, why have our brothers, the men of Yehudah, stolen you away and brought the king and his household, all David's men with him over the Jordan? All the men of Yehudah answered the men of Israel, because the king is our relative. Okay, good picture of when Judah have their eyes opened and they recognize the king Yeshua as their relative. Why are you displeased over this matter? Have we at all eaten at the king's cost, or has he given us any gift? The men of Israel answered the men of Yehudah and said, we have 10 parts in the king and in David too. We have more than you. Why then do you despise us? Was it not our advice first to bring back the king? This reminds me of the parable with the workers who are all receiving wages. The ones who receive it at the end are resented by those who have been working all day. The house of Israel could say, was it not our advice first to bring back the king? Did we not recognize Yeshua first? And then the men of Yehudah, whoever they turn out to be, at the end have their eyes opened. Will the men of Israel have that same reaction? We've been laboring all day. Why should they get the same reward? But the words of the men of Yehudah were harsher than the words of the men of Israel. Okay, so now we're going to come on to what happens when David passes his kingdom onto Solomon. We see the same actions by similar characters. Adoniah, son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I reign. Okay, so just like Avshalom did, you know, blow the trumpet and say, Avshalom is king in Hebron. And he prepared for himself a chariot and horsemen and 50 men to run before him, exactly as Avshalom did years previously. Now his father had not worried him at any time by saying, why have you done so? He was also very good looking, and he was born after Avshalom. So this is an Avshalom-like character. And he walked with Joab, son of Zeruiah, and with Eviathar the priest, and they supported Adoniah. Nathan said, he's the guy who's prophet to King David as well. Nathan said, my master, O king, have you said Adoniah shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne? For he has gone down today, and he has offered great numbers of bulls and fatlings and sheep, and has invited all the king's sons and the commanders of the army, and Eviathar the priest, and look, there eating and drinking before him. And they say, let King Adoniah live. But he has not invited me, your servant, nor Sadok the priest, nor Benayahu, son of Yahuyadu. Basically, he's not invited those that he knows are loyal to the king. He's just invited people that he thinks can be swayed away. Then Sadok the priest and Nathan the prophet, those who are loyal to King David, Benayahu, son of Yahuyada, went down, and they had Shlomo ride on David's mule and took him to Gihon. Shlomo, or Solomon, was who David had said he will be king. The popular king, the one who had taken it upon himself, was not to be king. And those who were faithful to King David knew this, and they took Solomon down to crown him. And Zadok the priest took a horn of oil from the tent and anointed Shlomo, or Solomon. They blew the horn, and all the people said, "Let King Solomon live." And all the people came up after him, and the people played the flutes and rejoiced with great joy, so that the earth was split by their noise. All the guests who were invited by Adoniyahu were afraid and rose, and each one went his way. They realized, maybe we shouldn't have made this new man king. And Adoniyahu was afraid of Solomon, and rose and went and took hold of the horns of the altar, which would make him holy, where he would think, I cannot be taken from here. It was reported to Solomon, saying, "Look, Adoniyahu is afraid of King Solomon. And look, he has taken hold of the horns of the altar, saying, let King Solomon swear to me this day that he does not put his servant to death with the sword." And Shlomo said, if he proves himself a worthy man, not one hair of him is going to fall to the earth. But if evil is found in him, then he shall die. Just like the once saved, always saved. I've been made holy by Yeshua. Yeshua, the king, would say, well, if he proves himself worthy, then he will not die. If evil is found in him, then he will. And also, you know what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to me, and what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, to Avner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Yether, that he slew them and shed the blood of battle in peace, and put the blood of battle on his belt that was around his waist, and on the sandals that were on his feet. Okay, you can see that as the belt of truth, the feet shod with the gospel. And this is a man who has done harm to that. So act according to your wisdom. This, by the way, is David speaking to his son about, to Solomon, about what he should do with various men. He says, so act according to your wisdom. Do not let his grey hair go down to Sheol in peace, but show kindness to the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite. Let them be among those who eat at your table. For so they came to me when I fled from Absalom, your brother. And see, with you is Shimei, son of Gerah, the Binyamite from Bahurim, who cursed me with a grievous cursing in the day when I went to Machanaim. But he came down to meet me at the Yarden, and I swore to him by Yehovah, saying, I shall not put you to death with the sword. Now do not leave him unpunished, for you are a wise man, and know what you should do to him, and shall bring his grey hair down to Sheol with blood. So, to finish, from the prophetic perspective, or from the perspective of Yeshua, particularly those men there at the end who King David decreed that if they did good, then they would go on to good, but those who had done wickedness would perish. So Messiah's enemies, Avshalom, would be anyone who does not agree with the king, so takes matters into his own hands according to what he believes is right, captures the hearts of the people of Israel by telling them that they are right in their particular issues. Oh, the Torah is wrong there, whatever. The Torah is wrong, you're right. And that he would judge favorably if they made him judge. Rebels against Yehovah's anointed. He rebels rather against Yehovah's anointed and is ultimately destroyed. Achithophel, whilst previously a friend of Messiah, will go along with the rebellion and he is ultimately destroyed. Shimei is forgiven but goes on to disobey the king, something I didn't cover, but he did go on to disobey the king about staying in Jerusalem. And ultimately, he is destroyed. Even though he had forgiveness, he was ultimately destroyed because he disobeyed the king. Adoniah tries to seize control of the kingdom because he doesn't like the one whom Messiah has appointed. Ultimately, he is destroyed. So it's Adoniah who, in the time when Solomon is to be crowned, he declares himself to be king, and he is just like Avshalom. Messiah's friends, Mephibosheth remains faithful to Messiah regardless of how it is outwardly perceived and is ultimately honored by Messiah. Hushai is ultimately honored. Barzillai is ultimately honored, the foreigner and exile. Messiah's commanders, Joab serves Messiah but eventually rebels. Okay, he wants to do things his own way, so he takes things into his own hands. He rebels. He was initially a commander of Messiah. He rebels and ultimately is destroyed. Ittai is ultimately honored, and Avishai is ultimately honored. Avishai, who disagrees with King David like Joab does, but he goes about it differently. He does what the king has said, even though he disagrees.